This is a really cool study that's being done by a PhD student in the Netherlands. It's the first housing bubble. They're looking at house prices and turnover, it was sales, number of sales in Amsterdam from 1582 to 1810. This is amazing. What they used to do in Amsterdam is they would register, I mean, the data is not complete, but it's pretty good, where they would register the sale of a home, partly, I think, because it was tax related. But let me skip down. I'll show you what one of them looked like. Okay, here's some property transfer paperwork. This one is for Rembrandt himself. And basically what it does here is, this is an appendix A if you want to look at it exactly, and there is a transcription. But it's basically describing the property. They didn't have house numbers back then. So a lot of this is describing where it's located. And it also has a clean title kind of a statement in there where the seller's promising that he's giving essentially clean title to own the place. So what these researchers had to do is go through all of these and align them up between different how to the specific house, somehow digitize it so that they could do it. And there's a lot of volunteers involved with this, but they were able to do it and get this amazing data set. Okay, we're at the top again. And the data set came to some interesting conclusions. I'll show you a graph in a minute, but I'll get to the conclusions here is basically they didn't have mortgage credit or a tiny amount of mortgage credit back then, but they still had these bubbles without that. And then he goes in to explain why that is. It's basically not that the money was coming from the mortgages, but from a different source. What was going on was people used to have in Amsterdam back in the day, they had three basic places the rich people would invest their money: government bonds, then there was stocks, and there was real estate. And the amount of, and oftentimes people would get interest on their government bonds and they would buy new government bonds. But then there was a period where there wasn't any new, they got to the point where they had so much debt, they didn't want to take on any more debt. So people, when these rich people in Amsterdam were getting their money from their government bonds, they couldn't buy new government bonds anymore. So what did they do? They would buy stocks and real estate. So that's where the money came from, is from this change in the alternatives of the opportunities of where to invest the money. And now it was, instead of three options, there were just two, and real estate was one of them, and prices skyrocketed. So that was a big driver. And of course, as he mentions here, speculation. It's really interesting also how similar it was, despite this big difference between modern bubbles and these ones 200-300 years ago, was the similarity in the speculation aspect of it. Okay, here's a great graph starting in 1600. And the data is loosey-goosey at the beginning, but it gets better as time goes on. And you can see that the red line is the regular sales, and this yellow line is foreclosures. And you can see there's three huge bubbles. Goes up and is flat for decades, takes off again, flat for a while, takes off again. He focuses on this bubble here. This was in the golden age of Amsterdam, where, like at the beginning, there's something like 25,000 people in Amsterdam, and by the end, it's like 200,000 is the golden age. So there's a lot of other things going on. And in this one is kind of, it ends in like in the early 1800s where they're essentially annexed by Napoleon. So that ends in defeat. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on here. This middle bubble is easier to pull out the economic effects because there's less political and population going on. So the population here was pretty much the same. The economy was pretty stagnant. Was so you can there's less confusing things going on besides the economics. And you can see here what happened was that the sales increased. Let's go look at another graph that shows us better. But before we do that and go down to the next or another graph, notice that the sales increased here, the number of sales, because they have all this money and they can't put it into government bonds anymore, so they're putting it into real estate. But the prices keep going up and up and up. They didn't like go up and then level off. So there's another factor going in there, which is the speculation factor. Prices couldn't just go up and level off for a while. They continue going up until they peak and crash. Now let's go down to the next graph. Okay, this red line, well, you can see there's zero here. If you just put a line straight across here, you can see that this red line is the net flows to public debt holders. So goes from basically zero to a huge increase in the amount of money going to these debt holders because they can't reinvest it back into government bonds. So the stock market, the yellow line, takes off, and the blue line are stock prices, and the real estate prices take off as well. It's interesting how the stock went up first and peaked and then started to fade while real estate continued to go. Kind of get a flashback to the .com and people switching over into real estate after the .com bust. But that's what he's talking about. This triggered this change in policy of the opportunities of where to invest money that was one of the reasons for the real estate bubble. And he thinks particularly in this middle bubble that speculation was a big part of it. So you can see the percent, the red line here is the percent, the blue line is the real home prices. The red line is the percent sold within 3 years. So of the ones that were sold, this is the percentage that were sold in 3 years of that purchase. And you can see, so there was a lot of speculation. So as prices are going up, people are deciding, okay, before when prices were flat, the value of the home was basically the rent. But when prices are going up, there's a new opportunity here. I can buy it and then make money when I sell it from the appreciation. So the price appreciation was starting to generate prices. And this red line supports that idea that it was speculators coming in. Oh, you didn't see that much here, which doesn't support that as well. And I'll end here with figure 3. The blue line is, of course, the prices, and red is the rent. So you see rents went up a little bit there, but that wasn't really such a big driving force. And also the day wages, they were pretty flat. So that wasn't driving it, because typical when you look at fundamentals of home prices would be income, rents, but you can see prices continued up after they started because the change in investment opportunities that have made it real estate was a big one. It continued going. So that's a lot of the speculation factor, the price momentum factor. And I talk a lot about that in the second of the 2 articles. So I'll link in this video to the 2 articles I wrote for Forbes.com about this really, really cool study. I love seeing this ancient study because I'm so focused on the US real estate bubble to look at something that's a new perspective and try to pick out what is human and what isn't not. And the speculation thing seems to be pretty similar. What happened in our real estate bubble in the United States and what happened in Amsterdam 250 years ago. Great. Thanks, everyone.